Now, after the explanation of what political science is, let's quickly go into the scopes of political science. And I want to tell you that when we say scopes of political science, we are talking about the bodies, the parts that are made up of political science. Let me give you an instance. Let's say in an higher institution, we have different faculties. Let's say faculties. And it's these different faculties that made up that institution. We have political theory or philosophy. We have international relations. We have national politics. We have comparative politics. We have public administration. Those are the scopes that are made up political science. Let's start with the first one. When you say political theory, what are you talking about? It is dated back to Aristotle, Plato, Thomas Hobbes, and the rest of them. These have been the people who sat down to study different institutions, different ideologies, in order to prescribe what ought to be. So it is theory of philosophy. It is theory that based on critical thinking. It is theory that based on reasoning. It is philosophical. It is normative. It is psychological. It is speculative in nature because it is based on thinking of different individuals. What do they do here? They describe in order to prescribe. What do I mean? For instance, we have Baron de Montesquieu, who sat down and he described the then existing political system, and he noticed that there was fusion of power. He thereby prescribed that there ought to be separation of power. Meaning that under political theory, people sit down and think about something and describe what ought to be in existence. So moving to the next one, international relations. International relations. This is talking about the relationship between and among different nations in the world, whereby all the nations in the world, they relate with one another institutionally, legally, and economically in different aspects, and they try to relate with one another. And international relation is not even limited to the political aspect, meaning that we have other aspects like legal aspects, whereby they make laws for themselves, the laws that guide the affairs of their relations. And also in terms of economy, some countries try to advance their economic system by relating with one another, by getting resources from one another. And also we have ethics and ethos, whereby people tend to maintain morality and immorality by remaining amoral in the international system to maintain ethics and ethos. So we are talking about international system. Basically, we are talking about the relationship between and among nations in the world. Comparative politics. When you say comparative politics, you're talking about art of comparing and contrasting different political systems or different countries in the world. For instance, we might want to study political parties in Nigeria and the one in America by comparing and contrasting them. By comparing and contrasting them in the sense that we want to know their similarities and their differences. So that is what comparative politics is talking about. It's all about we comparing two systems, two almost systems, to know what they have in common and their differences. And the next one is public administration, which is basically talking about how public activities or public policies are being carried out for people to be able to benefit from it. And also national politics, which is one of the schools of political science, is talking about we study our home politics. We study our home politics. That is, we have to understand the politics of our home country, what we are doing in our country. We have to know our ideologies. We have to know the performances of our political system. Because without you understanding the political system of your home country, you won't be able to relate to the political system of other countries. Moving forward, we have what we call the approaches to the study of political science. And when I say the approaches to the study of political science, according to Nan Asik, he said approaches to the study of political science are the general strategy that we use to study political science. So we have two major approaches among the rest one that we have, and every other approach that we might want to mention either in higher levels, they fall under these two. So we have basically the normative or traditional approach, and we have empirical or scientific or behavioral approach. So those are the two major approaches that we have. So I'll be explaining them one by one. Talking about the first one, normative or traditional approach. This approach based on what ought to be, the theory of what ought to be. That is what ought to be in existence. That is, what are we supposed to have in our political system? What ought to be in our political system, or what should be? It is theory of what ought to be or what should be. So I will be explaining it. Like, there was a time whereby the philosophers were philosophizing the state. That is, they were using their wisdom to study the state and to prescribe what ought to be in the state. And that's why when you are studying the principles or the ideologies of separation of power, democracy, rule of law, sovereignty, and some other ideologies, you notice that all of these ideologies are the postulations of different individuals. They were ideas that different individuals came up with. So these things were not in existence, and that is exactly what they are doing under normative or traditional approach, meaning that people gather or individually sit down in different places thinking about their political system and describe that political system and be able to prescribe what ought to be in that political system. Meaning that after when they have described the political system, after when they have studied it, they will be able to identify the problem and prescribe what can take away the problem. And it is no more a news that during the time of Aristotle, he said some things about democracy, what an ideal democracy should be. So also we had in Plato, Socrates, that they proposed different ideologies that now we are making use of them. So in normative or traditional approach, we study, we describe in order to prescribe. And here, before I forget, under the normative or traditional approach, they study institutions, they study ideologies, they study principles, they study ethics, they study morality. Why the second one, which I'm about to explain, the empirical or scientific or the behavioral approach, here they don't study institutions, here they don't study principles, they don't study ideologies, but they study humanity, because they believe that it is the humans are the one operating in all these institutions. Humans are the one formulating all these ideologies, meaning that we are not meant to be studying the ideology, but we are to be studying the personalities behind all these ideologies. So when you are talking about scientific approach, it is the one that is capable of prediction, meaning that we are trying to predict humans who are forming these ideologies, who are making these institutions to be operational. So here they don't study principles, because they know that humans are the one making principles. Here they don't study institutions, because they know that humans are the one operating in these institutions. In fact, they are the ones setting up the institution. So appearing on this channel today, I believe that we will be able to explain some things, and when next we are coming back, we go into details about introduction to political science, because there's still need for us to be able to learn some basic concepts, power, rule of law, separation of power, and some other necessary concepts that I believe that students of political science around the world ought to understand more. Come to the end of today's video, I want you guys to comment, like, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell for you to see more of our videos. See you guys in our next video.